Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 7th episode of Ask a BFI. And I am here with a very special guest, Lieutenant Laura. As you can see, we are wearing our masks. We're practicing safe hygiene and everything like that right now because, well, if we want things to go back to normal, the best thing we can do is follow guidelines, keep our mask on, and everything like that. So before we get in to asking Lieutenant Laura some questions, I am going to do the same thing I did with Kyle, with Liz, with Amber. And I'm going to kind of talk about my experiences with Lieutenant and kind of. No, it's all good. And who I kind of see her as a person. So, as I said before, whenever I moved down, the first person I met was Lieutenant Laura. So her and somebody I've been forgetting to mention, Kent, who is our head maintenance guy. Is that the best way to put it? He's the guy who fixes everything.
Expert in everything.
Expert in everything. And he drives me crazy because whenever something's broke at the core, and me, Liz, Lieutenant, Captain will try to fix it ourselves, it doesn't work. All he has to do is walk into the building and look at it, and it'll start working. But they actually met me at the house I'm staying in now whenever I pulled into Corpus Christi. And they were there offering help to unload the car. I think that same night, Lieutenant asked me, I know you just moved in, but if you need to come over for dinner or anything like that, you're more than welcome to. And so I think that's a good place to start, just showing her heart, which is the biggest aspect of Lieutenant that I think stands out, is her heart. Because she knew that I had just driven 18 hours. I think I was coming into a place where I didn't know anybody. And she was there to meet me and offer, a place to come eat, relax if I needed it. That was my first experience with Lieutenant. And from there, the next day, I think also kind of shows her heart as well. The next day, I came into the office, and she asked if I wanted to go get lunch, and I was like, yeah, I would appreciate it. And we went to a Mexican restaurant right up the street. We sat down, and we just had a very good conversation. And I'm not a person who opens up very easily, especially people I don't know. But Lieutenant's heart and her compassion that shines through kind of was able to break that down immediately for me. I was able to, I remember talking to her about my brother and kind of the challenges I think I would face coming down here and being so far away from him. And she was awesome. And every day that I've been able to work with Lieutenant, that is really the biggest thing I can say, is that I have met very few people in my life that could match Lieutenant's heart, and none that I could say, have a bigger heart or compassionate, just mindset as she does. Also with that, she's probably one of the most creative people I've met. And
I can get us into trouble.
So, I'm not saying anything that she doesn't already know. Sometimes her ideas are so, I wouldn't say off the wall, because they're really good.
They really are off the wall.
But they're good. They're good. They're good, though. But they're so out of the box is the best way to say it. And sometimes you got, I don't know, but we got to think about this. And she's like, yeah, that's a good point. But the fact that she has that creative mind challenges all of us to think outside the box and think of better ways to help serve and minister. So, Lieutenant, there you go. That is my introduction for Lieutenant. So our first question is, being a Salvation Army officer, what are some of the responsibilities you have here in Corpus Christi?
Well, here in Corpus, we have a lot of things going on all at one time. There's a lot of plates that we spin. I say we, as in all of our staff, but also Patrick and I as the Corps officers. And so there are just some of the responsibilities we have, of course, is administration over everything that goes on here, over the shelter, the administration building, and the thrift store. But also we have responsibilities for fundraising to make sure our budget is good, that we're still able to serve the people in our community. We also have the responsibility to our advisory board to inform them, even recruiting more advisory board members to make it stronger so that our Salvation Army is stronger. And then, of course, our responsibility also is to pastor, and to pastor not just our core people and our children who go to the Corps, but also to our employees. And both Patrick and I see ministering to our employees just as important as it is to minister to the people that attend our church.
So we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but I know for me growing up, I viewed officers and I didn't fully understand the vast array of things that they have to oversee. I know, like, I grew up in the church and I viewed the officer as he or she was the pastor. And I didn't understand that there are so many different aspects to being an officer other than just being the pastor. The pastor falls into all of those. There's always a ministry to everything we do, but it's more than just getting up at a pulpit on Sunday or leading a youth program.
Yes.
So that's one thing, like, I hope whenever we go through this conversation, I want you all to understand is if you're watching and you are part of the Salvation Army, make sure you understand the vast array of things that your officers have to take care of, and just how much is on their plate and how much they do need help from their local leadership. So before we go into more about your job or your, I wouldn't even say it's a job, it's more of a calling.
Yeah.
I want to just talk a little bit more about you and how you came to be an officer.
Yeah.
So, were you raised in the Salvation Army?
Yes, I was raised in the Salvation Army. My parents are still active Salvation Army officers. They're stationed in South Carolina, and that's all I've known as a church. I've attended other churches at different points in my life, but I've always been strongly connected with the Salvation Army.
So, growing up, seeing your parents as officers, and did you grow up knowing that you wanted to be a Salvation Army officer? Was that your goal?
Yeah. So, honestly, I'm sure a lot of officers today could say that they ran away from that calling for a long time. And I was one of those that ran away from that calling. I knew from a very young age that God had placed in my heart a heart to help people, help others. And I pursued different things in order to help others. But I knew in my heart of hearts as I grew older that it was through the Salvation Army that He wanted me to continue my journey with Him. And yeah.
Yeah, I think obviously God made the right decision.
Yes.
And I think you did too, as far as following His calling.
Yeah.
And that's something else I wanted to kind of touch on. Is we keep saying that word calling.
Yeah.
And it might sound simple, but what exactly does it mean?
Yeah.
To have a calling.
So, yeah, a calling is more than like a career choice. So a calling is actually not a choice. A calling is what God has specifically said to a person, to any individual, like, I want you to go here. Like, for instance, this morning, I was just reading through a little bit of Exodus when he was specifically telling Moses, I am calling you to release my people from slavery in Egypt. And we know, reading the scripture, yes, Moses could have chosen to not do it. But to be honest, when God speaks to you, when God calls you to do something, it is for a greater purpose than you can see. It was for a much greater purpose than Moses could see at that time when God was calling him. So that's what I compare, how I would describe a calling, that God is specifically calling you for a specific thing. And it's not easy to follow that calling. There's a lot of sacrifice that is made to follow God's calling, but it is 100% worth it to follow God's calling, because anything outside of what He's calling you that you might choose to do will not be satisfying at all.
And something that I think you kind of touched on, that's a great point too, is you're saying most officers you think have run away from their calling at one point or another. And I think that goes for, not just officership, but a lot of us, whenever we first share that calling, sometimes it's not something we ever thought we would do in particular.
Yeah.
Like,
or something that you understand what it
yeah,
is.
100%.
Like Moses, he did not understand what God was saying.
Yeah, and God, whenever, yeah, that's just a really good point. I'm glad you made that, because I think sometimes we can feel guilty whenever we run from our calling. And there is a part of us that, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have ran, but you also got to understand, like you're saying with Moses, whenever God first called Moses, first response wasn't yes.
Right, exactly.
It was, well, I've got this, I struggle with this, but God found a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that point. Thank you for talking about that. So, growing up, you saw your parents as officers. Going into being, first, before we get to that question, was there like a certain point where you finally decided, okay, I hear you calling me, God, and I am going to?
Yeah.
Was there a certain point that happened?
Yeah, and in the words of my beautiful friend Karen Rowe, she would say, "Is this going to be a long story?" Yes, it's going to be a long story.
That's fine.
So, and Karen, I hope you watch this. You might want to tag her in this.
Yeah, I'll tag her in it.
But so yes, there were specific times in my life that God called me to be an officer, and the first time He specifically said that He wanted me to become an officer was when I was still in undergraduate school at Asbury College, and it was around the time of my senior year at Asbury that this is part of my testimony a little bit here, that I went astray, and I actually met and then later on married my now ex-husband. And in that time that I did that, I was completely walking away from what God had called me to do, and even walking away from everything that I learned how to live right, how to live a life of holiness. I was just completely turning my back and choosing my own path in life. And that brought nothing but destruction. And on top of that, I was experiencing abuse at home. And I was not opening up to anybody about it because I was, like many people who are abused, especially women, you try to think, like, how can I make it better? And how can it be better? And not to dwell on that part of the story, but that kept me away from my calling for a long time, because anybody who's watching this from outside of the Salvation Army who don't know how it works, when you become a Salvation Army officer and you're married, both people in the marriage become Salvation Army officers. You work together as a married team. So after several years of not being connected to a church or anything like that, the Lord brought me back to the Salvation Army through a job and actually before that, he brought me back to the Salvation Army because I had no other choice but to move back in with my parents because we struggled so much financially. And even living under my parents' roof, they had no idea this abuse was happening. So I was offered a job working at territorial headquarters. And so we moved to Atlanta, and I was, Kathy and Eddie Hobgood were amazing mentors and pastors to me. And they unknowingly brought me back to the Salvation Army and back to where I knew I belonged. And after working there for several years, I also started working for Kelly and Donna Eigelhart. And there was a position that was open, and I took that position, another position, and it required for that position, since it was a ministry position, for the person to be a uniform wearing Salvationist. And that might sound weird to anybody who is outside of the Army, but what that means is that if you're a uniform wearer, that means that you're a member of the Salvation Army Church. And that means that you are attending and part of the ministry of the Salvation Army, not as an officer, but just as a member of the church. And that's what that means. And I was attending my good friends, Jeremy and Christina Maccabee's commissioning one year. And God spoke to me in a very clear way. You are going to be up there one day, becoming a Salvation Army officer. My response to him was, well, you're going to have to work on this guy because he hates the Army and he does not want to have anything to do with you, Lord. And he answered my prayer. He answered that. He made a path. He made a way in a way that I never expected. I was finally able to open up to my family about what was happening at home. It actually took my dad, who grew up in an abusive household, to look me in the eye and tell me what I was experiencing was abuse, because it took him to do that because I knew what his story was growing up. If anybody else had told me that, it might not have clicked, but it was my dad who told me. So after that, it was a long road, and not to say that I am an encourager of divorce. I am not at all, but that is the path that God led me down to be released from that abuse. And he put people in my life. He made a way for me to be released from that bondage. That bondage, just like the Israelites were being released from Pharaoh. And not very long after that, I was babysitting Hannah and Nolan Nelson, whose parents were actually the candidate secretaries at the time. And Hannah and Nolan and I went to our core for a Sunday morning. I have no idea what the speaker was talking about because the Holy Spirit just came over me in that moment and said, you need to start now. And so I knew what he meant. You need to start preparing to be an officer now. And so that's what I did. And I decided at that point in my life, instead of ignoring his calling that I had done so many years before, that it was time for me to start following what God had for me. And so, yes, Karen, it was a long story, but you needed to know all of that part, because I know a lot of people, when I just say, oh, I ran away from it, that's just, I think a lot of people need to hear, like, there are all kinds of different ways that the enemy can prevent you from following God's calling.
And it's the bad times in our lives, God can redeem to get somebody else out of it. And I know he's done that with you and your story, and I know it's helped people. I know it's helped people here, and even though God will never, God isn't the one who's going to put us through those horrible times, but
Yeah.
He can redeem them,
Yes.
and He will redeem them, and He can use those to show people His love and how He can change your circumstances. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. So going into being an officer, you grew up with parents who were officers, and now you've accepted the call and you're going into it. What were your kind of expectations? I think you would have a better idea, maybe a better idea, since your parents
Yeah.
are officers than most people who weren't raised up in it like you were. But going into it, what were your expectations of being an officer, and is there anything that you found that has surprised you that you weren't expecting?
Wow. Okay. So there was a lot that has surprised me since actually after commissioning and becoming an officer. But my expectations before going into officership, to be honest with you, Jesse, is that very same perception that you had of what an officer was.
Yeah.
Was preaching on a Sunday morning, ministering to your people, and doing youth programs. Those all things that I love, that I love to prepare for, I love to do. And those were the ideas I had of what a Salvation Army is. In fact, I'm not trying to bash anybody at the EDC, but that's really what we focused on a lot at the college, at the training school. And also, I'm fortunate enough to have a very intelligent husband who is very good with administration and experience as an officer prior to mine. So anything else as far as administration wise, I always thought to myself, well, just Patrick will take care of it. But anyway, he's gonna watch this and laugh. But yeah, that my expectations of being officer were mainly being able just to spend my life ministering to people. So surprises were, we got here and 2 months later, Hurricane Harvey hit. That was a surprise because now we had like a huge disaster on our hands, and trying to figure out how to minister to our community in a very practical way alongside of the disaster teams. It was very difficult, but it was very rewarding because we didn't quite know all of our core people at the time when that hit, but we really, really, really got an accelerated introduction to all of them because they stepped up and they were there serving every day, and it was really excellent. Another surprise is that it's actually very difficult to find time to prepare for sermons and Bible studies and youth programs. That's a surprise to me, because there is so much else going on, just like all day long, and that stuff that both Patrick and I have to address. The other surprise to me was I just thought that Patrick and I would work together as a team and everything just, be buddy together. But the surprise to me is that here in this appointment, we've had to pretty much divide and conquer. And he takes care of a lot of things and I take care of a lot of things. So that was surprising to me that we don't always work together through everything. Yeah.
But I will say, with that, another way of God kind of knowing it was the right calling for you all and that you all were meant to be married is that being here, that surprise of having divide and conquer, it's actually really good because your talents and your skills, I think, are best doing kind of what you're doing now, where you're kind of more, like you're more my direct supervisor if we're talking about like, a managerial system, and I think that's really where shine the best at, though, is over that. And Pat, not that you couldn't do the administration, you
You wouldn't want me to do it.
Yeah, but you could do it, and
Yeah.
just like Patrick, Captain Patrick, sorry, is, he's more over the administration side. Not that he couldn't do
Yeah.
it, but your skills are best whenever you all are a team working over different things. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome. So last couple questions. Favorite part of the job,
Oh,
or favorite part of the calling, I think is a better way.
yeah. I have to say, my favorite part is literally just being with my people and seeing how God is working in their lives. I mean, that is my favorite part of this calling. And other highlights of this calling I'll add to it is being able to reach out to those who are literally suffering and bringing some glimmer of hope to their life. And I get to do that every day. And also a highlight is to work with the kids in the Corps. They're wonderful, and it's a highlight to know that we're making a difference in their life. So those favorite part and highlights. Yeah.
All right. Least favorite or biggest biggest struggle, I guess.
Have you ever seen A Beautiful Mind?
Yes.
I feel like that happens to me every single time stats come around. So
you're just kind of like
statistics. Saren Lang, if you're watching this, you are amazing, because statistics is the hardest thing for me. My least favorite part of this calling, and I will add in reports. We have to do reports to divisional headquarters. Those are my least favorite parts to do. But one thing that Patrick reminds me of, and that I remind myself of every time I do it, is the numbers on those pages and the reports that are reflected, that have to be turned in, reflect people, reflect the work of what we're doing here. And so even though the struggle is real for me, like, I am not a numbers person. So it is not fun for me to sit down and do those reports or do statistics, but it's necessary, and they reflect, just like in the book of Numbers, and all the genealogies reflect people. That's what statistics and reports reflect, is the actual people and the actual ministry.
So I'm right there with you. I detest statistics and numbers.
Yes.
That's just not how my mind works.
Yeah, me either.
Well, I think we're gonna close out. Lieutenant, thank you once again for being here. Thank you for doing this. Just to reiterate once again, just how much, and I know Liz will say the same thing, and a lot of people will, how much we do appreciate your heart. And it truly is an inspiration to see how much compassion you have for people, and how much you do care for people, and how much you want to help people. And the way your mind works and your creative mindset, even though it challenges us, that's a good thing, because it does force us to view different perspectives we probably had never thought of. So I want to say thank you for that. Thank you for putting up with me and my temperamental self that I can be sometimes, and just being a truly awesome officer, a great supervisor, and a wonderful friend. And I do mean that. I know I don't really say these things too often.
But you're saying it while a video is recording.
That's what counts.
That's what counts.
That's the only reason why I do these videos, is just so I can just say the nice thing and never have to say it again. No. But no, I truly do mean that. And thank you for who you are. Thank you for listening to God's calling. And God will continue to do great things through you and through Captain Patrick. Well, guys, thank you for joining us on our 7th episode of Ask a BFI. I will say there will be a name change coming because my position is no longer a BFI.
What?
Yeah, we'll talk about that more in the following weeks. But some things are going to change. Please join us next week as we will have April from the thrift store is going to join us.
Nice.
And she's going to talk to us about the ministry of the thrift store and how, even though it is a store, it's not your typical store. And how things work over there.
Is there a typical store?
I don't know. So, guys, stay safe, stay clean. Please make sure if you go outside, you're wearing your mask, wash your hands, social distance. If we want things to go back to normal, the best thing we can do is follow protocol and listen to people who are telling us to stay safe, put on our mask. All right, guys, God bless. I'll see you later.